The chandeliers inside the Smith family estate glowed with the brilliance of hundreds of tiny crystals scattering light across the polished marble floors like captured fragments of stars. From the outside, the mansion looked timeless white stone, framed by columns in the classical style, sprawling gardens reaching toward the Connecticut horizon. Generations of wealth had lived and died within these walls. Every corridor carried whispers of triumph and ruin. And tonight, Henry Smith felt the burden of it all pressing down on his shoulders. At 34, he had already become one of the most powerful men in America. As CEO of Smith Media Group, he controlled television networks, global streaming platforms, and publishing houses that influenced the minds of millions. His name alone could move markets. His signature could end careers. He was a man who lived in glass towers, attended by assistants, worshipped by investors, envied by rivals. But in that moment, sitting at the long mahogany table in the grand dining hall of the Smith estate, Henry felt like a prisoner. The ticking of the antique grandfather clock on the far wall echoed through the room. Each sound reminded him of time slipping away, time that no amount of money, no empire could purchase back. He had exactly 11 months. 11 months to fulfill his father's ultimatum, produce a legitimate heir before his 35th birthday, or watch the family fortune, every billion of it, transferred to charity. Henry drummed his fingers against the polished wood table, eyes fixed on the crystal glass before him. The bourbon inside barely trembled, though his pulse raced beneath the calm exterior he had perfected over years of boardroom battles. "Still brooding, darling." The voice drifted into the dining hall like silk dipped in poison. Henry looked up to see Victoria Hale, his stepmother, glide into the room, dressed in deep crimson silk that clung to her still youthful figure. She carried herself with the grace of a woman who knew the power of her presence. Expensive surgery had smoothed the lines of age from her face, but nothing could soften the ruthless ambition in her eyes. "Victoria," Henry said evenly, masking the irritation that always rose in him at the sound of her voice. She smiled, as polished and cold as the jewels glimmering at her throat. "How are you and Isabella doing? 3 years of marriage, and still no little Smith running through these halls. How tragic for a dynasty built on bloodlines." The words struck their intended mark. Henry's jaw tightened. He had heard this countless times before from the press, investors, and so-called family friends. But from Victoria, the sting was sharper, deliberate. "We are trying," he said quietly, though the defensiveness in his tone betrayed him. Victoria let out a soft laugh, like the chiming of glass. Trying. Such a fragile word. "Some women, Henry, are not built to carry the future of great families. You should consider alternatives." Before Henry could reply, the click of polished shoes on marble echoed from the corridor. Brother Ethan Hale, Victoria's son from her first marriage, appeared with his arrogance. Ethan had inherited none of the Smith blood at 28, yet he had been raised as though the empire was his birthright. Tall, broad-shouldered, with charm that could win over strangers in seconds, he used charisma as a mask for his calculating mind. Henry rose stiffly as Ethan approached, his smile too quick, his embrace too warm. "I told Mother," Ethan said, "how much pressure you must be under, enough to destroy any marriage." Henry studied his stepbrother's face, but sincerity was always absent, only performance, only calculation. "Isabella and I are fine," Henry replied curtly. "Of course you are," Ethan said, his smile tight. "But stress does affect fertility, you know. I could recommend a specialist. We already have doctors." Henry cut him off, voice low but firm. A glance passed between Victoria and Ethan, brief but unmistakable. It was the language of conspirators, one Henry had learned to read long ago. Henry's chest tightened. He had not yet mentioned to anyone the strange changes Isabella had been experiencing: fatigue, nausea, dizziness. She had brushed it off as stress, as nerves over the looming inheritance deadline. But as Victoria pressed her false sympathy tonight, he could not shake the creeping fear that something far greater was happening. "Where is Isabella?" Victoria asked smoothly, settling into a chair with feline grace. "I do hope she's not unwell again." "She's resting," Henry answered. "I should check on her," Victoria offered. "A woman's touch can be so comforting during difficult times." "No." Henry's voice cracked through the air like a whip. For a fleeting moment, Victoria's smile faltered, revealing the sharp edge of her disappointment. Then she recovered her mask, restored her eyes glittering with hidden schemes. Silence returned to the room, broken only by the relentless ticking of the clock. Each second mocked Henry. Each minute reminded him that legacy, empire, and history might collapse into dust if he failed to produce an heir. Ethan leaned back casually in his chair, swirling his wine. "It's ironic. One of the most powerful families in the world, and our entire future depends on biology. Primitive, really." Victoria's laugh was delicate, like ice forming on water. "Your father has always been a romantic at heart. He believes in bloodlines, legitimate heirs. Old-fashioned, perhaps, but his will is law." Henry said nothing, though the words twisted inside him like a blade. His father, Richard Smith, had married 3 times. Henry's own mother had died, giving birth to a stillborn child. Richard's second marriage had ended in bitter disappointment when the woman proved infertile. His third and final marriage to Victoria had produced only Ethan, a stepson, with no claim to the Smith blood. And now, it all came down to Henry. 11 months, 1 child, or everything vanished. The creak of the grand staircase interrupted his thoughts. Every eye turned as Isabella descended. She appeared like an angel gliding down from heaven, the white silk of her nightgown flowing around her form. Her skin glowed rich and warm against the pale fabric, and her dark eyes carried vulnerability and strength. But the way her hand rested gently against her abdomen froze Henry's heart. Pregnant. The realization hit him like a tidal wave. His pulse thundered in his ears. His breath caught. He wanted to rise, run to her, and hold her, but he could not move. Isabella reached the bottom step and crossed the room with quiet grace. The world seemed to pause, as though even the chandeliers dimmed to witness this moment. She knelt beside Henry, her voice soft, but carrying the weight of salvation. "I went to see Dr. Sarah Collins today," she said. "The tests came back positive. We're going to have a baby." The words detonated in the air, reverberating through the room like an explosion. Henry felt tears burn his eyes as he pulled her into his arms. For 3 years they had hoped, prayed, tried. And now, at last, their miracle had arrived. "How far along?" he whispered. 6 weeks, Isabella murmured. "I wanted to be sure before I told you." Henry pulled back, searching her face, finding joy in her eyes. For the first time in years, the heavy knot of anxiety in his chest loosened. But as he held her, he glimpsed Victoria. Her expression was not one of joy nor relief. Her face was blank, her eyes sharp, calculating like a predator studying its prey. Ethan's hands tightened around his wineglass knuckles, pale jaw tense. Victoria said at last, her voice perfectly modulated, devoid of warmth, "How wonderful. A baby. Just in time." The words slithered into Henry's heart, turning joy to ice. Isabella pressed closer to him, trembling. He could feel her fear. "We're going to bed," Henry announced, his arm firm around his wife. "Of course," Victoria purred. "Rest is so important during pregnancy, especially during the first trimester when things can be uncertain." The threat was subtle, but Henry heard it. Isabella heard it too. Henry's mind churned with dark possibilities as they ascended the staircase together. His family's reaction had revealed more than disappointment. It had revealed fear. Victoria and Ethan were not just concerned about losing their place in the Smith dynasty. They were terrified of it. And terrified people Henry knew from years of ruthless negotiations were capable of anything. Behind them, the chandeliers glittered coldly over Victoria and Ethan, as they sat silently, masks of civility concealing the hatred beneath. The game had begun, and Isabella, beautiful, radiant, innocent. Isabella did not realize she was already the target. Morning light poured through the tall windows of the Smith penthouse in Manhattan, spilling across ivory curtains and gilded frames. The city below hummed with life horns, voices the rhythm of commerce. Yet inside the penthouse, silence reigned. Henry stood at the balcony's edge, his hands gripping the railing as though holding the entire world in place. Last night's revelation still thundered in his chest. Isabella was pregnant, their miracle, their salvation, the answer to his father's will. And yet, even as joy had coursed through him, he had seen the glint in Victoria's eyes. Cold, calculating, too calm for such news. And Ethan, his stepbrother, had looked as if someone had ripped away the ground beneath him. Henry knew they would not accept this quietly. Behind him, the soft sound of bare feet on marble drew his attention. Isabella appeared wrapped in a cream silk robe, her dark hair tumoring freely around her shoulders. Her beauty was effortless, the kind that stole breath without trying. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, gently joining him on the balcony. He turned, forcing a smile too much on my mind. Her hand reached for his small and warm, grounding him. "We should be celebrating. We will." Henry promised, brushing a kiss against her forehead. "But I need to make sure everything is safe." A flicker of unease crossed Isabella's face. She knew what he meant. She had felt Victoria's hostility from the first dinner she attended at the estate, when every glance from her stepmother-in-law had carried judgment sharpened like glass. "We'll see Dr. Grant today," Henry continued. "I want him to confirm everything. If anyone can ensure your health, it's him." Isabella nodded, though her chest tightened. Something in her had always recoiled from Dr. Stephen Grant. His hands too cold, his smile too rehearsed, his eyes lingering longer than necessary. But Henry trusted him, and for Henry's sake, she said nothing. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and polished steel hidden behind tinted glass in a discreet corner of Park Avenue. Dr. Stephen Grant greeted them in his immaculate white coat, his silver hair combed neatly, and his demeanor was calm and reassuring. He was a physician of integrity, a man who had served the Smith family for over 2 decades. But as he shook Isabella's hand, his eyes flicked briefly to Henry, then to the closed office door, where his secretary stood watch. The look was quick, practiced, but Isabella noticed. Mrs. Smith and Dr. Grant began smoothly motioning toward the leather chair. "Congratulations are in order. This is excellent news." Isabella sat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Henry remained standing, restless, his gaze fixed on the doctor. "I want every test," Henry said firmly. "Every assurance. My wife's health comes first." "Of course," Dr. Grant said, with professional calm. "We'll run standard blood work and an ultrasound. But—" He paused, his tone softening, as if he were about to deliver an unwelcome truth. Henry's stomach clenched. But what Dr. Grant glanced at Isabella, then back at Henry, lowering his voice, as though confiding something too delicate to speak aloud. "Given the circumstances, the inheritance, the pressure, you must be aware that certain anomalies could complicate things." "Anomalies," Henry repeated sharply. Dr. Grant steepled his fingers. "Forgive me. I don't wish to alarm you. But occasionally, results reveal inconsistencies. Genetic markers, for instance. I assure you, If such things arise, we will handle them discreetly. Isabella stiffened, heat rising in her cheeks. Are you suggesting? No. Dr. Grant interrupted smoothly, raising his hands. I'm merely speaking hypothetically. But you know how the press is, Mr. Smith. A single whisper could destroy reputations, destabilize markets. I only want you prepared. Henry's throat tightened. He had seen reputations destroyed overnight. A headline could wipe billions off his company's value. A scandal could stain the Smith name forever. And Dr. Grant knew it. Isabella reached for Henry's hand, her eyes blazing. There's nothing hypothetical here. I'm carrying our child. That's all that matters. Her conviction should have reassured him. But instead, Henry felt the faintest tremor of unease. Not because he doubted Isabella, but because Dr. Grant had planted a seed of fear, and Henry knew fear had a way of growing like ivy, creeping into cracks until it strangled everything. Later that evening, after the tests were completed, Dr. Grant called Henry into his office alone. Isabella waited outside, leafing through a magazine she did not read, her mind heavy with suspicion. Inside, the doctor's tone had shifted. No longer casual, but grave. Dr. Grant said, I wanted to speak to you privately. His voice low. The initial blood work raises questions. Henry's chest tightened. What questions? Dr. Grant leaned forward, lowering his voice further. The markers don't align with your profile. It's early, of course, but if confirmed, the child may not be biologically yours. The words detonated like a bomb. Henry gripped the arm of his chair, the world spinning. That's impossible. Again, Dr. Grant soothed. It's only preliminary. These things can be errors, but the responsible thing is to retest. Quietly. Discreetly. Henry's mind reeled. Isabella, no. She would never. Yet the doctor's calm certainty gnawed at him, and behind the doctor's words, he heard echoes of Victoria's subtle poison. Some women are not built to carry the future of great families. Henry rose abruptly. I want the results in writing. Of course, Dr. Grant said, concealing his satisfaction with a professional nod. But please, discretion, for the sake of your wife's health and your family's legacy. When Henry entered the hallway, Isabella looked up, her dark eyes filled with trust. Is everything all right? He forced a smile. Yes, they need to run a few more tests. She relaxed, unaware that the first fracture had already splintered between them. The following days unfolded like a dream turned sour. Isabella busied herself with nursery ideas, baby names, whispered under her breath. Late-night confessions about her hopes and fears. She decorated lists with stars, smiled at tiny shoes displayed in shop windows, hummed lullabies when she thought no one was listening. Henry watched her with aching tenderness. He wanted to believe with every fiber of his being. But the envelope sat heavy in his drawer, the one Dr. Grant had delivered, sealed, confidential. He had not yet opened it. The mere presence of it poisoned his peace. At night, when Isabella lay curled beside him, Henry stared at the ceiling, haunted by questions he could not silence. What if Dr. Grant was right? What if Isabella betrayed him? What if Victor Cheng, his old rival, was more than just a name from the past? He remembered Victor's smirk across negotiation tables, the way his eyes had lingered on Isabella at industry galas. The possibility festered, unreasonable, yet irresistible. One evening, as Isabella drifted to sleep, Henry rose quietly and entered his study. He opened the drawer. His hands trembled as he broke the seal of the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and when Henry read the words, his heart stopped. The report was clinical sterile, but its meaning was devastating. Paternal markers inconsistent. Probability of biological relationship 0%. Henry's vision blurred. His breath came shallow. The room tilted around him. It wasn't true. It couldn't be true. And yet here it was in black and white. He crushed the paper in his fist, rage and heartbreak warring. Henry whispered a name like a curse in the silence of his study. Victor. Meanwhile, in a private club lined with mahogany and cigar smoke across the city, Victor Cheng sat with a glass of brandy, smiling faintly as his phone buzzed. The message was brief, unsigned. It has begun. Victor leaned back, savoring the burn of liquor down his throat. For years he had waited for this. To watch Henry Smith crumble. To claim what he believed had always been his. And now fate, or perhaps something darker, was delivering the opportunity straight into his hands. The Smith estate had never felt more like a fortress than it did that evening. From the outside, its white stone walls and manicured gardens projected timeless grandeur. Inside, however, the air quivered with tension, like a storm gathering behind gilded windows. The family had been summoned for dinner. Richard Smith's command, not a request. At the head of the long mahogany table, the patriarch presided in silence, his once powerful frame diminished by age, but his presence still formidable. Henry sat at his right hand, Isabella beside him. Her fingers brushed against his beneath the table, searching for reassurance. He did not pull away or entwine his hand with hers. His eyes remained forward, unreadable. On the other side, Victoria, Hale, and Ethan mirrored each other perfectly, poised, perfectly practiced, like two actors rehearsed for their roles. The first course arrived, velvety butternut squash soup, steam rising in delicate tendrils. Yet no one lifted a spoon. Richard cleared his throat, his graveled voice cutting through the silence. I received troubling news today. Isabella's breath caught. Henry stiffened beside her. Victoria tilted her head with feigned innocence. Oh, Richard, must we darken a family dinner with unpleasantness? Richard's gaze sharpened. This family is nothing without truth, and the truth is being buried. Ethan leaned forward, his tone respectful, almost reverent. Father, you know we only wish to protect the legacy. If rumors spread. Rumors. Isabella interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. Is that what this is now? Whispers in hallways. Gossip at charity galas. Victoria placed a manicured hand over her chest as though wounded. My dear Isabella, you mistake our concern for malice. We only want what's best for the family. For you even. For me, Isabella's dark eyes blazed. Or for yourselves. The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Richard's fist struck the table, rattling silverware. Enough! His gaze was fixed on Isabella. Tell me, is the child you carry my blood? The question cleaved through her heart. She had expected suspicion. Cold shoulders, the sting of Victoria's veiled insults. But to hear it from Richard himself, this man who had once welcomed her with cautious warmth, was like being cut open. Her lips parted, trembling with both fury and grief. Yes. With every beat of my heart, I swear it. Silence followed, brittle and suffocating. Henry's eyes darted to her, searching, desperate for something to silence the torment in his mind. But the image of Dr. Grant's report flashed before him, cold and damning. He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to. But the crack between them widened, invisible, yet undeniable. The rest of dinner was theater. The conversation moved forward in shallow currents. Ethan boasted about his latest investment, and Victoria sighed about social events. But beneath the words ran an undercurrent of accusation, of judgment. Isabella pushed food around her plate, appetite lost. Each laugh from Victoria sounded like triumph. Each nod from Richard was like a condemnation. When dessert was served, she excused herself, claiming fatigue. Henry hesitated, torn between duty and doubt, but remained seated. Upstairs, Isabella stood at the window of the guest chamber. her reflection fractured by the rain streaking the glass. The gardens below blurred into darkness. Her mother, Maria Rodriguez, sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had insisted on joining Isabella for this family dinner, sensing the undercurrents before her daughter even spoke them aloud. "They don't see me," Isabella whispered. "They know an intruder, a threat." Maria rose, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You are more than their accusations. You carry truth inside you, Isabella. Do not let their venom define you." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes, though she blinked them back fiercely. "Henry, he hasn't defended me. Not once. It's as though he's slipping away from me." Maria's expression softened with sorrow. Men who grow up in houses of power learn to trust papers and signatures more than hearts. But love, true love, is tested in fire. He will have to choose. Later that night, Henry entered their bedroom, when the halls had quieted and the rain had ceased. Isabella sat in a chair by the fireplace, a shawl draped over her shoulders. The flames cast soft light across her features, illuminating beauty and exhaustion. He paused at the threshold, conflicted. He wanted to go to her, to fall at her feet, to confess the torment tearing him apart. But pride and fear held him back. "You should rest," he said finally. She lifted her gaze, steady and unwavering. "Rest. When your family calls me a liar to my face. When even you—" Her voice faltered. "Do you even doubt me?" The accusation struck him like a blade. "I never said that. You didn't need to." Her words were quiet, but they burned. "I see it in your eyes." Henry's fists clenched at his sides. The forged reports seared in his memory, twisting his thoughts into knots. He wanted to tear it apart, to erase it from existence, but its poison clung to him. "I want answers," he said at last. "I need to be certain." Isabella rose, her shawl slipping to the floor. "Certainty or permission to believe the worst?" "I gave you my heart, Henry. I gave you my life. And now I carry your child. If that is not enough, then nothing ever will be." Her voice broke on the last words, but she did not cry. She stood tall, her chin lifted, her dignity unshaken. Henry stepped forward, aching to hold her, to erase the chasm widening between them. But she turned away, facing the fire. And in that moment, he felt the first actual distance from the woman he loved more than life itself. Downstairs, Victoria and Ethan poured glasses of wine in the library, their hushed laughter echoing against shelves of leather-bound volumes. "You see how quickly the seed takes root," Victoria murmured, her smile sharp. "Doubt is the most potent weapon. It grows silently and visibly, until it consumes everything." Ethan lifted his glass to the beginning of the end. The following days only deepened the fracture. Richard grew colder toward Isabella, avoiding her presence altogether. Victoria paraded concern in public, but sharpened her whispers in private. And Ethan, he watched his smile, always too knowing, as though savoring her unraveling. Isabella withdrew to the city apartment, choosing distance over daily humiliation at the estate. Henry visited when he could, torn between devotion and suspicion. Each embrace was shorter, and each kiss was more hesitant. Isabella noticed. She felt every inch of his retreat. And though her heart screamed for him to fight for her, she also knew she could not force his belief. One evening, as the sun dipped behind Manhattan's skyline, Isabella stood on the penthouse balcony, her hands resting protectively over her small but growing bump. Henry approached quietly, his face etched with exhaustion. "I want to believe you," he whispered. She turned, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Then do it. Believe me. Believe us." His silence answered for him. And with that silence, Isabella realized the cruelest truth. The battle had already begun, and she was fighting it alone. The rain had passed, leaving the lawns of the Smith estate glistening in moonlight. From the outside, the mansion exuded its usual grandeur: marble columns, sculpted gardens, windows aglow with golden light. But inside, the atmosphere was charged with something darker. Richard Smith had called for a formal dinner. To outsiders, such gatherings were traditions of elegance, a display of power that reminded the world the Smiths remained untouchable. To those within the family, however, dinners meant reckoning. The dining hall stretched endlessly, its vaulted ceiling painted with fading frescoes of angels and empires. At the head of the table, Richard sat stiff and silent, his cane resting against his chair. Though age had bent his body, his eyes still held the authority that once conquered industries. Henry sat at his right, Isabella at his side. Across from them, Victoria Hale radiated quiet triumph. Her scarlet dress, a deliberate contrast to the cool ivory of the tablecloth. Ethan reclined beside her, swirling his wine, with a smirk that barely concealed anticipation. The servants retreated after serving the first course. Silence thickened. The only sound was the slow ticking of the ornate clock on the far wall. Richard's voice finally broke through, gravelly deliberate. "I have heard whispers I do not like." Isabella's breath caught. Her hand instinctively sought Henry's beneath the table. He let her hold him, but did not tighten his grip. "Whispers?" Henry asked carefully. Richard's gaze sharpened, that the future of this family may not be as secure as I was led to believe. Victoria sighed softly like a woman burdened by tragedy. "Richard, must we drag such matters into the open? Poor Isabella looks pale already." "Better pale than dishonest," Ethan said smoothly, his eyes glinting as they flicked toward Isabella. Her cheeks burned, but she forced herself to meet his stare. "If you have something to say it plainly." Ethan smiled as if indulging a child. "Plainly. Very well. You've been absent from the estate, visiting the city without explanation. And now, suddenly, you carry the salvation of the Smith name. Forgive us if we are curious." Henry stiffened. "Enough, Ethan." But Richard's hand struck the table, silencing them all. "Isabella," he said, his voice carrying the weight of judgment. "Look me in the eyes and tell me the child you have is of my bloodline." The world seemed to stop. Even the candles flickered as though holding their breath. Isabella's throat tightened. She rose to her feet, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. "With every breath and beat of my heart, I swear to you, this child is Henry's. Yours. No one else's." The declaration should have ended the conversation, but suspicion once planted rarely dies. Richard's gaze lingered cold and unreadable. Victoria looked down, hiding her satisfied smile behind her wine glass. Ethan reclined again, victory in his eyes. And Henry? Henry could not move. His heart wanted desperately to reach for Isabella, to silence the venom with his love. But in his mind, the forged report repeated like a curse. Probability of biological relationship 0%. The crack widened. Dinner carried on in strained civility. Crystal clinked against porcelain. Servants moved silently, trained to ignore the battle between words and silences. Isabella forced herself to eat, though each bite turned to ash in her mouth. She could feel Victoria's gaze on her, like a knife could hear Ethan's soft chuckles meant to humiliate. When dessert arrived, she excused herself quietly, refusing to let them see her crumble. The guest chamber upstairs smelled faintly of lavender, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Isabella stood at the window, rain still dripping from the eaves outside. Her mother, Maria Rodriguez, sat nearby, knitting with calm concentration. She had insisted on staying at the estate for a time, sensing that Isabella would need her presence more than ever. "They look at me like I'm poison," Isabella whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Even Richard, especially Richard." Maria set her knitting aside and rose, placing her hands gently on Isabella's shoulders. "You are not poison, mija. You are life. You carry hope. Do not let their bitterness twist your truth." Isabella's tears brimmed, but she held them back. "Henry hasn't defended me. He sits in silence while they cut me down." Maria's expression softened, a mother's sorrow deep in her eyes. Power can make men doubt what they know in their hearts. But love, true love, will be tested, Isabella. He must choose, and you must endure until he does. Later, when the house grew quiet, Henry entered their bedroom. Isabella sat near the fire, her shawl draped across her shoulders, her profile lit in amber glow. She did not turn when he closed the door. "You should rest," Henry said softly. Her voice was calm, but her words were sharp. "How can I rest when your family calls me a liar? When even you—" She swallowed hard. "Even you look at me with doubt in your eyes." The accusation pierced him. He wanted to deny it, to say she was wrong, but his silence betrayed him. "I never said that," he managed. "You didn't have to," she replied, her gaze steady, unflinching. "I can feel it every time you hesitate." Henry's chest ached. He wanted to collapse at her feet to confess the torment tearing him apart. But the report's words clawed at his mind, refusing to release him. I need certainty," he whispered. Isabella stood, her shawl falling. She faced him fully, her dignity unshaken. "Certainty, or permission to believe the worst? I have given you my heart, my body, my future. I carry your child. Nothing will ever be if that is not enough for you, Henry." Her voice trembled only once, but she did not cry. Instead, she turned back to the fire, shoulders straight. And Henry, for the first time in his life, felt powerless. Downstairs, laughter echoed faintly from the library. Victoria poured herself another glass of wine, her ruby lips curling into a smile. Ethan sprawled beside her, his grin wide and confident. "You saw it," Victoria murmured, satisfaction dripping from every word. "He hesitates now. Doubt has taken root." Ethan lifted his glass to the beginning of her downfall. They clinked their glasses together like the tolling of a bell. Days passed, and the fracture deepened. Richard grew cold toward Isabella, avoiding her gaze at breakfast, dismissing her presence in conversations. Victoria's concern grew more pointed, her remarks sharper always with an audience. Ethan hovered like a shadow, his smirk constant, his insinuations more brazen. Isabella withdrew to the Manhattan apartment, seeking refuge. Henry visited when he could, but each visit was shorter, his words fewer, his eyes burdened. At night, Isabella lay awake, her hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her belly. She whispered promises to her unborn child, that no matter what the Smiths believed, no matter how cruelly the world turned against them, she would never falter. One evening, as twilight painted the skyline gold, Henry joined her on the balcony. The city stretched endlessly below, alive with lights and noise. "I want to believe you," he said, his voice raw. She turned, her eyes shimmering with restrained tears. "Then do it. Believe me. Believe us." His silence was louder than any answer. And in that silence, Isabella realized the truth. The house she had entered as Henry's wife was no longer a home. It was a battlefield, and she was the enemy. New York glittered beneath a sky of crystal stars. Limousines lined the avenue outside the Metropolitan Museum of Art, their sleek frames reflecting the flood of flashbulbs. Society's finest spilled onto the steps in waves of silks and tuxedos, jewels catching the light like fire. Inside the grand atrium had been transformed into a vision of elegance, towering arrangements of white orchids, champagne fountains, chandeliers strung like constellations. The annual Smith Foundation Gala was not merely a charity event, but a declaration of power. For generations, the Smiths had hosted the night that set the tone for Wall Street and Washington alike. And tonight, every eye was on Henry Smith and his wife. Isabella descended the museum's marble staircase, her hand lightly on Henry's arm. She wore a gown of midnight velvet, its deep hue contrasting with the radiance of her skin. A delicate diamond necklace traced her collarbone, borrowed from the family vault. She moved with grace, but inside her chest, her heart thundered. She had not wanted to come. Parading before society felt unbearable after the cruel dinner at the estate, Richard's cold accusation, and Victoria's smug insinuations. Yet Henry had insisted. It will silence the whispers, he had said. If we appear strong together, no one will dare question us. But Isabella wondered if the appearance was for her sake or his own peace of mind. The gala unfolded in the blur of introductions and photographs. Senators shook Henry's hand. Investors clapped his shoulder, and socialites kissed Isabella's cheeks with two sharp smiles. "You're glowing, my dear one," whispered eyes, flicking knowingly toward her abdomen. "How convenient." Isabella forced a smile, though her fingers dug into her clutch. Across the room, Victoria reigned like a queen in emerald silk, Ethan at her side. Their laughter rose above the crowd, too joyous to be sincere. They watched Isabella constantly, as if anticipating a performance. And indeed, a performance had been arranged. The first act of the trap began subtly. A waiter brushed past Isabella, murmuring, "Message for you, Mrs. Smith." He slipped a folded card into her hand before vanishing into the crowd. Isabella frowned, opening it discreetly. "Meet me in the West Wing Gallery. Urgent." The handwriting was Henry's, or at least it was close enough to convince her. She touched Henry's arm. "I'll be right back." Distracted by a conversation with a senator, he looked at her and nodded absently. Isabella wove through the throng, her heels silent against the polished floor. The West Wing was quieter and dimmer, and its gallery was filled with Renaissance paintings and hushed shadows. And there waiting was Victor Cheng. He looked impeccable in his tailored tuxedo, his dark eyes gleaming with amusement as she entered. "Isabella, you came." Her breath caught. "Victor, what are you doing here?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I wanted to congratulate you personally on the pregnancy." Her spine stiffened. How do you know news travels? And he interrupts smoothly, especially when it threatens empires. Isabella moved back, suspicion rising. If this is some joke. Victor smiled, a predator savoring the moment. No joke. Only truth. Tell me, Isabella, are you confident Henry deserves you? Does he even trust you anymore? Her heart pounded. The venom in his words was unmistakable. He knew. Somehow he knew the doubts festering in Henry's mind. "I have nothing to say to you," she whispered, turning to leave. But as she did, Victor caught her wrist, not harshly, but firmly enough that the scene could be misconstrued. And that was when Henry entered. The sound of his footsteps echoed like thunder in the gallery. He froze at the sight before him. Isabella, radiant in velvet, standing too close to Victor Cheng, his hand around her wrist, their faces inches apart. The image was a dagger to his heart. Henry. Isabella began pulling her hand free, but his expression stopped her cold. His eyes, once filled with devotion, now blazed with betrayal. "You!" "Henry," hissed Victor, his voice a low growl. "Get away from her." Victor raised his hands innocently, his smile infuriatingly calm. "Relax, Henry. We were only talking." Talking. Henry's laugh was bitter hollow. "That's what this is." Isabella stepped forward, desperation in her voice. "It's not what it looks like. I thought you sent me a note, but—" Henry cut her off, his voice sharp, broken. "Do you take me for a fool?" The words cracked like a whip, reverberating off marble walls. Guests, drawn by the commotion, began to gather at the gallery entrance. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as they beheld the tableau. Henry Smith, betrayed husband. Isabella Rodriguez, unfaithful wife. Victor Cheng, the rival interloper. Victoria appeared among them, her hand delicately covering her mouth in horror. Ethan stood beside her, grinning like a wolf. "Henry, please," Isabella begged, her eyes wide with anguish. "I swear to you I did nothing. Nothing." His voice rose, shattering the illusion of control. "You humiliate me. You stain this family's name, and you dare stand there and swear." Isabella's tears glittered under the chandeliers, but she held her ground. "Look at me. Look into my eyes, and tell me you honestly believe I would betray you." He hesitated. For the briefest second, doubt flickered. He wanted to believe. He always wanted to believe. But the forged report, the whispers, the image before him screamed louder than her words. His voice broke as he declared, "The child you carry is not mine." Gasps swept through the gallery. The humiliation was complete. Isabella's knees nearly buckled, but she forced herself upright. With dignity that belied the shattering of her heart, she whispered, "One day, Henry Smith, you will regret this moment." And then she walked away, her gown trailing like a shadow of lost love, leaving him surrounded by silence and stares. The gala resumed, but the night was poisoned. Whispers spread like wildfire through Manhattan's elite. By morning, headlines would scream, "Betrayal scandal, disgrace." Henry stood alone in the gallery, his fists trembling, his chest heaving. Victoria approached softly, her voice like silk over broken glass. "I am so sorry, darling. I warned you. Some women are not built to carry the weight of legacy." Her touch on his arm was cold. He shrugged it off, but her words had already sunk deep. Ethan's laugh echoed as he clapped Victor on the back, their performance complete. And Isabella. She left the museum without looking back, tears finally spilling as the city's neon lights blurred before her. She had entered the night as Henry Smith's wife, carrying his legacy. She left it broken, shamed, and utterly alone. The headlines struck like arrows. Smith, heir, betrayed. Pregnant wife. Exposed at gala, Isabella Rodriguez. Mistress or martyr. Empire in crisis. Smith, legacy at risk. By dawn, every newspaper, every digital column, every whisper in Manhattan carried Isabella's name like a brand burned into scandal. Photographs from the gallery, her standing too close to Victor Cheng Henry's face, twisted in fury, spread across the city like wildfire. The image was simple, damning, undeniable to those who thrived on gossip. And so the verdict was passed before Isabella could speak guilty. The penthouse was silent when Henry returned that night. He loosened his tie with trembling fingers, the echo of voices still clanging in his ears. Every handshake at the gala had become a judgment. Every gaze had been pity, contempt, or quiet calculation. Isabella's suitcase lay open on the bed. Silk dresses folded neatly, shoes wrapped in tissue, her perfume lingering faintly in the air. She turned when he entered, her eyes red from weeping, but her spine straight. "I won't beg you," she whispered. Henry's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her he believed her, pull her into his arms, and silence the chaos with love. But pride, and poisoned doubt spoke louder. "I've filed for divorce," he said. The words tasted of ash. Her lips trembled, but she did not cry. "Then it's done." She zipped the suitcase with quiet finality. "One day, Henry, the truth will find you. And when it does, you'll realize you destroyed the only person who ever loved you without condition." She lifted the case, her figure fragile yet fierce. He made no move to stop her. The door closed behind her, and the echo rang like a gunshot in his soul. Brooklyn smelled of rain and Subway steam-fried food drifting from corner vendors, and life lived too close and loud. It was a world apart from marble estates and glittering galas. In a modest walk-up apartment above a florist's shop, Isabella began again. Her mother Maria welcomed her with open arms, and her embrace was strong despite her age. "This is not the end, mija," she said. "This is where you prove who you are." Isabella nodded, though her heart ached with every beat. Her belly was heavy now, the twins pressing against her ribs, reminders of both love and betrayal. Neighbors whispered when she passed, recognizing her from tabloids. Some pitied her, others smirked. She held her head high regardless. At night, she lay awake listening to the hum of traffic, her hands cradling her unborn children. "I will not fail you," she whispered. "Even if the world calls me a liar, I will be your truth." Meanwhile, Henry's empire began to crack. Stockholders panicked. Shares of Smith Media plummeted by 12% in a single week. Advertisers threatened to withdraw, unwilling to be associated with a scandal. Board members muttered about incompetence, Henry's judgment and legacy slipping through his fingers. In the press, his humiliation became entertainment. "The man who controls the media." One columnist sneered, "Cannot control his own household." Henry faced the cameras with practiced calm, his suits flawless, his voice steady. But behind closed doors, he drowned in bourbon, staring at the city skyline with hollow eyes. Every night, the memory returned, the sight of Isabella and Victor in the gallery, the forged report in his desk drawer, her voice pleading with him to believe. He told himself he had done the right thing. That legacy demanded sacrifice. That betrayal could not be forgiven. Yet in the silence of his penthouse, he could still smell her perfume, hear her laugh, and feel her hand's warmth in his. And each time regret gnawed deeper. Regret. Isabella's days grew harder as winter approached. The subway stairs felt steeper, the groceries heavier, the stairs harsher. But she refused to bend. Jessica Moore, her closest friend and lawyer, visited often. "You have rights, Isabella. Henry may try to silence you, but the law is not his empire." "I don't want his empire," Isabella replied. "I want my children to be safe. That's all." Her voice was steady, but she allowed herself to cry when no one watched at night. She cried for the love she had lost, for the husband who no longer trusted her, for the future her children would never know within the walls of the Smith estate. Maria comforted her with quiet prayers, whispering blessings over her growing belly. "God gives the most decisive battles to his strongest daughters," she said. The day came sooner than expected. It was a stormy afternoon when Isabella's contractions began, sharp and relentless. The city streets flooded with rain, taxis honked furiously, and the hospital loomed like a lighthouse through the chaos. Maria held her hand in the back of the cab, whispering courage. Jessica met them at the hospital, her presence a shield against fear. Hours passed in a blur of pain and breath, of nurses moving swiftly, of doctors' voices rising and falling. And then, at last, two cries split the night. A boy and a girl. Twins. Isabella wept as she held them, their tiny fingers curling around hers. She named them Gabriel and Amara, names that carried strength and hope. "You are mine," she whispered to them. "No one will ever take you from me." Henry learned of their birth not from a phone call, a message, or the morning paper. The headline read, "Isabella Rodriguez welcomes twins Smith legacy in question." He sat at the long dining table in the estate, the paper trembling in his hands. Victoria sipped her tea, her smile hidden behind porcelain. Ethan leaned back, smirking. "Congratulations," Ethan drawled. "You're a father. Or at least someone is." Henry's blood boiled, but he said nothing. He folded the paper and rose, leaving the room before his rage consumed him. Alone in his study, he poured another glass of bourbon. His reflection in the glass window was a stranger, haunted eyes, hollow cheeks, a man who had everything but felt nothing. He imagined Isabella in some cramped hospital room, cradling the children who bore his blood. He imagined her tears, her strength, her quiet dignity. And for the first time, doubt pierced deeper than pride. What if he had been wrong? Exhausted but radiant, Isabella rocked her twins in the dim hospital light. Their breaths were soft, their tiny bodies fragile, yet perfect. Her mother sat nearby, watching with tears of joy. Jessica smiled, snapping a photograph that captured the moment. Isabella, hair damp with sweat, gown wrinkled yet more beautiful than ever. "You look like victory," Jessica whispered. Isabella shook her head, kissing Amara's forehead. "Not victory. Survival." She glanced toward the window where rain streaked the glass. Somewhere beyond, Henry lived in marble and glass, surrounded by wealth. But here in this humble room, Isabella had everything that mattered. And she would protect it with her life. Henry dreamed that night of Isabella's voice. He dreamed of her whispering his name, of children's laughter, echoing through halls that had long stood empty. When he woke, the penthouse was silent. The only sound was the city below, indifferent to his loneliness. He poured another drink, but it did nothing to warm the hollow ache inside. For the first time, Henry Smith, man of steel, master of empire, felt utterly defeated. Not by markets, not by rivals, but by his own heart. The apartment in Brooklyn had grown smaller since the twins arrived. Bottles lined the counter, laundry baskets filled corners, and the air smelled faintly of baby powder and sleepless nights. Yet to Isabella, it was a palace. Gabriel's tiny cries pierced the early dawn, soon joined by Amara's softer wails. Isabella rocked them in her arms, exhaustion etched beneath her eyes, but love pouring from every gesture. She whispered promises between lullabies. "You are my truth. You are my strength. No matter what the world says, I will never let you doubt who you are." Her mother, Maria, crept through the kitchen preparing tea, her presence a steady anchor. Life was not easy, but it was honest. Still whispers followed Isabella wherever she went, at the grocery store, in the doctor's waiting room, on sidewalks, where strangers recognized her face. The tabloids had turned her into a pariah. She endured it gracefully, but each cruel glance was a wound that healed slowly. Meanwhile, at the estate, Henry lived in quiet torment. He had buried himself in work, but the empire continued to bleed. Board meetings felt like interrogations, shareholders like vultures circling a dying beast. The scandal clung to him like a second skin. At night, he poured bourbon and sat silently, haunted by ghosts. He imagined the twins, his twins, taking their first breaths, speaking their first words, reaching for a father who was not there. He told himself he had no choice. That betrayal, once suspected, demanded action. That legacy came before love. But the silence of his penthouse screamed louder than his justifications. It was in this silence that Daniel Whitaker returned. The detective had been hired months earlier at Henry's command, instructed to uncover the truth of Isabella's supposed affair. Instead, what he found had been buried. He'd remained silent for weeks, knowing the Smith's power could crush him if he revealed too much. But the guilt had festered. And when the whispers reached him that Isabella had given birth to twins, cast aside, abandoned, something in him broke. He arranged a meeting. The cafe in downtown Manhattan was unremarkable chipped mugs, flickering lights, the faint smell of burnt coffee. Henry slid into the booth opposite Whitaker, his eyes bloodshot, his suit immaculate but weary. "Why did you call me here?" Henry asked, his voice low-clipped. Whitaker leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Because you need to hear the truth. The truth you paid me to find. But they buried it before it reached you." Henry frowned, suspicion tightening his jaw. "What are you talking about?" "The DNA report. The photos. All of it." Whitaker pulled a folder from his coat and placed it on the table. They were fabricated, every last piece. Henry froze. The noise of the cafe faded into silence. His fingers hovered over the folder, afraid to touch it, fearful of what it might contain. Whitaker continued, his voice calm but resolute. Dr. Stephen Grant was on their payroll, Victoria and Ethan. They paid him to alter the results, to forge a report that would convince you Isabella's child wasn't yours. Henry's throat constricted. He wanted to deny it, to call the detective a liar. But Whitaker's eyes were steady, unflinching, like a man carrying the weight of conscience. He opened the folder. Inside were photographs of documents, emails between Ethan and Grant, instructions for falsifying genetic markers, bank transfers that traced directly to an offshore account. There were also unaltered test results, which were obtained quietly from the lab. The conclusion was clear. The children were Henry's. 99.9% probability. Henry's chest heaved, his vision blurring. He pressed a hand against his face, the world tilting around him. "My God," he whispered. "What have I done?" Whitaker's voice cut through his despair. "It doesn't end there. The photos of Isabella and Chung at the gala, those were staged. A waiter delivered her a note that appeared to be from you. I've tracked the handwriting. It wasn't yours. It was forged." Henry remembered Isabella's pleading words, her voice breaking, as she thought he'd sent for her. He had dismissed it as desperation. Now it carved into him like a blade. "She was innocent," Henry murmured, his voice hollow. Whitaker nodded. "And you destroyed her." At that moment, across the river in Brooklyn, Isabella sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand. She was writing in a worn leather journal. Her words, a mix of confessions and promises, meant one day for her children. "My darlings," she wrote, "the world may question you, but know this: you are loved, wanted, and mine. One day, you will learn the story of your parents. And though your father could not see the truth, it was never because you were unworthy. It was because he was blind to the light standing before him." Her tears fell onto the page, smudging the ink. She wiped them quickly, unwilling to let sorrow linger in her children's future. Henry returned to the estate that night, the folder heavy in his hands. Victoria awaited him in the drawing room, a glass of wine in hand, Ethan lounging at her side. "You look troubled," Victoria purred. Henry dropped the folder onto the table. Papers spilled across the polished wood. Bank records, emails, and unaltered test results. Victoria's face did not change, but her eyes flickered briefly, panic swiftly masked by poise. "What is this?" Ethan scoffed, though his voice cracked. "The truth," Henry said coldly. "The truth you've both tried to bury." For the first time in months, fury burned in his veins. Not at Isabella, but at them. Victoria set down her glass slowly. "Be careful, Henry. Accusations without proof can ruin you." I have proof he snapped enough to ruin you. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his arrogance faltering. Henry stepped closer, his voice low, lethal. You tore apart my marriage. You destroyed the mother of my children. For that I will see you stripped of everything you hold dear. He turned, leaving them in stunned silence. That night, Henry stood alone in his study, staring at the skyline. The city glittered indifferently, as if mocking his revelation. He thought of Isabella, holding their twins in a cramped apartment, believing herself abandoned. He thought of her words. One day, Henry, the truth will find you. And now it had. But it had come too late. Isabella slept lightly, and the twins nestled beside her. In the darkness, she dreamed of Henry, not the man who had betrayed her, but the man she had once loved. The man who had laughed with her in Paris cafes, and held her hand in quiet walks through Central Park, who had whispered promises against her skin. She woke with tears on her cheeks, clutching Gabriel and Amara closer. We'll make it through, she whispered, with or without him. The following morning, Henry called Whitaker again. What do I do? He asked, his voice breaking. Whitaker's answer was simple. You make it right, whatever it takes. But how does a man rebuild what he has burned? How does he win back a woman he shattered with his own hands? Henry did not know. All he knew was that the first step was finding her, facing her, and begging for a forgiveness he did not deserve. And in that realization, the war for redemption began. The winter air inside the Smith estate felt heavier than usual, as though the walls themselves mourned. Curtains were drawn, fires burned low, and footsteps softened out of respect for the man fading in the main suite. Richard Smith, the patriarch, the titan, the man whose name was etched across towers and foundations, was dying. The illness had crept swiftly, eroding his strength with ruthless efficiency. Once broad-shouldered and commanding, he was now a fragile figure against the mountain of pillows, his breaths shallow, his hands trembling even as he tried to steady them. Beside him sat Henry, no longer the stoic heir, but a son stripped bare. For days he had avoided this moment, burying himself in paperwork, anger, and bourbon. But when Whitaker's revelations had shattered the lies Victoria spun, Henry knew there was only one place he needed to be with his father. Richard's eyes fluttered open, gray and dim, but still holding a glimmer of the iron will that had built empires. "Henry," he rasped. "I'm here, Father," Henry whispered, leaning forward, his voice broke in a way it never had in boardrooms or ballrooms. "I should have been here sooner." Richard's lips curled faintly. Better late than never. A silence stretched between them, filled with everything unspoken. Love, disappointment, pride, regret. Finally, Richard coughed, his voice ragged but determined. "I know what Victoria and Ethan did." Henry stiffened. "You know," Richard nodded weakly. "I should have seen it. Should have protected you, protected her. But I let suspicion blind me. I let their poison fester because it was easier than confronting my own mistakes." Henry's chest ached. "She was innocent, Father. Isabella was innocent all along." "I know." Richard's eyes closed briefly, a tear slipping down his lined cheek. "And you, my son, you let them turn you against her." The words struck like a blade. Not cruel, but true. Henry bowed his head, shame consuming him. "I destroyed her. I destroyed us." Richard's trembling hand reached out, and Henry clasped it, grounding himself in the frailty of the man who had once been unshakable. "Then rebuild," Richard whispered. "Rebuild what you broke. Do not let my failures be yours." On the nightstand lay a leather folder, its edges worn. Richard gestured toward it. "My will, revised." Henry hesitated before opening it. Inside, legal documents bore his father's signature, witnessed and sealed. The words were final, irreversible. Victoria Hale and Ethan Hale were disinherited. Every asset, holding, and thread of the Smith empire was to pass solely to Henry, and by extension to his children. At the back of the folder lay a sealed envelope, addressed in Richard's shaky handwriting. For Isabella. Henry touched the envelope reverently, his throat tight. "She deserves the truth," Richard said. "She deserves an apology, but I cannot give her one in person." Henry's vision blurred. "I'll deliver it. I swear." Richard exhaled, his chest rattling. "Good. Then perhaps she will know. Not all of us were blind." The door creaked open, and Victoria entered quietly, draped in black silk, as though she were already mourning. Ethan lingered behind her, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing here?" Henry demanded, his voice sharp in fury. Victoria said, "I came to see my husband," smoothly, her gaze flicking toward Richard with feigned sorrow. "To comfort him in his final hours." Richard's eyes opened, his voice weak but cutting. "Comfort. You brought only ruin, Victoria. You poisoned this family. You destroyed the woman my son loved. You destroyed my faith." For the first time in years, Victoria's composure cracked. Her lips parted, but no words came. Ethan stepped forward, indignant. "You can't believe silence." Richard croaked, his frail voice still commanding. "You are no son of mine. Leave this house before I draw my last breath, or I will haunt you both until your dying days." The venom in his tone was unmistakable. Victoria's mask faltered entirely, her beauty twisted with rage. But the weight of Richard's final command left her no choice. With a hiss of silk, she turned and swept from the room, Ethan trailing behind her, his arrogance dimmed by fear. Henry watched them go, a cold satisfaction blooming where fury had burned. Richard sagged back against the pillows when the door closed, his strength nearly gone. "Promise me," he whispered. Henry leaned closer. "Anything. Love her again. Fight for her. Protect those children. They are the future of this family, not the empire, not the money them." Tears slid down Henry's face, unchecked. "I promise, Father. On my life, I promise." Richard smiled faintly, his eyes closing. "Then I can rest." His chest rose once, twice, and then stilled. The silence that followed was profound. Henry clutched his father's hand, unwilling to release it or accept the truth. The man who had been his anchor, judge, and example was gone. The funeral followed days later, a spectacle of marble and mourning. Politicians, tycoons, and socialites gathered to pay respects, their condolences perfumed with hypocrisy. Henry stood beside the casket, face carved from stone. Isabella was absent, her exile too raw, too painful. Yet as Henry greeted guests, he thought only of her, of how much his father's last words had changed everything. Henry returned to his study when the mourners left, and the estate grew quiet. The envelope still lay on his desk, addressed to Isabella, in his father's unsteady hand. He traced the letters with his fingers, his chest aching. Inside was not only his father's apology, but also the bridge Henry needed to build the first step toward redemption. He stared at the snow falling over the gardens and whispered into the silence, "Wait for me, Isabella. I will make this right." In Brooklyn, Isabella rocked Amara and Gabriel to sleep, unaware that across the river, fate had shifted. Unaware that the man who had condemned her was preparing to fight for her again. She kissed her children's foreheads and whispered, "You are my world." For now, that was enough. But soon, the truth would arrive at her door, carried in an envelope sealed by a dying man's regret. And nothing would ever be the same again. Brooklyn mornings had a rhythm of their own. The rattle of delivery trucks, the aroma of fresh bagels from the corner deli, the chatter of children rushing to school. In the Rodriguez apartment, the world was smaller, quieter, centered around two tiny hearts. Isabella knelt on the worn rug, coaxing smiles from Gabriel and Amara as they lay kicking on a quilt. Their laughter was soft and musical, bright against the faded wallpaper. For a moment, the ugliness of tabloids and betrayal vanished, replaced by the purity of motherhood. Yet beneath her smiles, a hollow ache remained. Every giggle reminded her of what they had lost. The father who should have been there to share these moments. The man who had turned his back when she needed him most. Her mother's voice called from the kitchen. "Mija, tea is ready." "Thank you, Mama." Isabella answered, scooping Amara into her arms. She kissed her daughter's forehead, whispering, "You'll never know loneliness, not while I breathe." She believed the promise until the knock came. Henry stood on the stoop, the cold February wind cutting through his coat. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, but nothing prepared him for the reality. The peeling paint of the door, the muffled sound of children's laughter within the fragile barrier between his guilt and the life he had abandoned. When the door opened, Isabella appeared, framed in the dim light of the hallway. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Her hair was pulled into a loose braid, her face bare of makeup, but she was breathtaking. More than that, she was strong, her gaze steady, her chin lifted in quiet defiance. Henry's throat tightened. "Isabella." Her voice was sharp, controlled. "Why are you here?" He reached into his coat and produced the sealed envelope. His father's handwriting trembled across its surface. "This belongs to you from Richard." Her eyes flicked to the letter, then back to him, too late for apologies. "Please," Henry whispered. "At least read it." She hesitated, torn between slamming the door and seizing the truth she had been denied. At last, she stepped aside. 5 minutes, no more. The apartment smelled of chamomile tea and baby powder, warm and lived in. Henry stepped inside, his polished shoes awkward against the creaking floorboards. He had walked through palaces, skyscrapers, boardrooms, but this small home humbled him more than any of them. Then he saw them. 2 bassinets near the window, sunlight spilling across soft blankets. And inside, his children. Gabriel shifted tiny fists, curling while Amara gurgled softly in her sleep. Henry's chest constricted, his eyes burning. "They're beautiful," he whispered. "They're mine," Isabella said firmly, crossing her arms. "Not yours. You gave up that right the moment you called them illegitimate." Henry flinched as if struck. "I was wrong. You destroyed me." Her voice trembled, but her eyes remained dry. "You believed forged papers over the woman you vowed to love. You humiliated me before the world. And now you stand here expecting what gratitude? Forgiveness?" "I expect nothing," Henry said, his voice low, raw. "Only the chance to say I'm sorry, and to give you his words." He held out the letter. After a long pause, Isabella snatched it from his hand, her fingers trembling. She broke the seal slowly, carefully, as though afraid the paper might dissolve. The handwriting inside was weak, but familiar, Richard's voice captured in ink. "My dearest Isabella," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone. But before I leave this world, I must speak the truth. I should have spoken long ago. You were wronged. You were innocent. I allowed suspicion and poison to blind me, so I beg your forgiveness. Know this, you are the heart of this family, more than titles or fortune could ever be. Love my son if you can. Forgive him if you can. And raise those children to know they are Smiths in blood and Rodriguez in strength. They are the future I leave behind. Yours, Richard." The words blurred as Isabella's tears fell onto the page. She pressed the letter to her chest, her body shaking. Henry stepped closer, desperate to touch her but afraid. He saw the truth before the end. And so do I. Isabella. I stop. Her voice cracked, but it was resolute. You don't get to stand here and rewrite the past. You don't get to erase the nights I cried alone, the birth you missed, the lies you believed. I know, Henry whispered, and I will carry that guilt until my last breath. But I will also have this truth: I love you. I never stopped. And I will spend every day proving it if you let me. She looked at him, then really looked. Behind the flawless suit and carefully chosen words, she saw the man she had once loved broken, humbled, desperate. And against her will, her heart remembered. But pain was stronger. You should go, she said softly. The children are sleeping. Henry's chest ached, but he nodded. He turned to leave, pausing only once more to gaze at the twins. Goodbye, Gabriel. Goodbye, Amara. His voice broke on their names. As he stepped into the hallway, Isabella sank to the floor, clutching Richard's letter. Her tears fell freely, now tears of grief, of love, of confusion, because no matter how much she wanted to hate Henry Smith, a part of her still loved him. And that was the cruelest truth of all. That night, Isabella placed the letter in her journal alongside her promises to her children. She reread Richard's words until exhaustion claimed her. Henry stared at the city lights in his penthouse across the river, whispering a vow into the darkness. I will win her back, whatever it takes. Neither knew what battles still lay ahead, but both felt the same shift, the fragile thread binding them together again. Not reconciliation, not yet, but possibility. The storm gathered not in the skies above Manhattan, but in the gilded corridors of the Smith estate. Word of Richard's revised will spread quickly. Victoria and Ethan, once draped in entitlement, had been cut out entirely. No inheritance, no influence, no seat at the empire's table. To the public, they smiled, pretended dignity, whispered of legal appeals. But behind closed doors, fury festered. And fury always seeks an outlet. Henry arrived at Isabella's apartment one gray afternoon, his expression grim. In his hand was a small black envelope delivered anonymously to his office. Inside was a recording. He placed the device on the table and pressed play. Victoria's voice slithered from the speaker, calm and poised. Henry Smith may think he has rebuilt his reputation, but one leak to the press could ruin him forever. Proof that his wife was unfaithful, evidence fabricated or not, will live on as truth. People believe scandal, not apologies. Then came Ethan's voice, smug and mocking. And if he doesn't pay, we destroy them. Him, her, the children. No Smith dynasty left standing. The recording ended in silence, heavy as lead. Isabella pressed her hand against her mouth, her body trembling. She won't stop. Henry's eyes burned with rage. No, but this time she won't win. The confrontation came sooner than expected. Victoria summoned them to the estate under the guise of negotiation. She chose the drawing room lined with portraits of past Smith patriarchs, as though their painted eyes might lend her legitimacy. Ethan hovered by her side, restless, a shadow of arrogance already cracking. When Henry and Isabella entered, Victoria rose with her usual grace, emerald silk, shimmering under the chandelier. Her smile was polished, but her eyes gleamed with venom. Henry, Isabella, how generous of you to come. Spare us, Henry snapped. We know about the recordings. Victoria's smile widened, unfazed. Ah, so you've heard them. Good. Then you understand the position you're in. The world already believes Isabella betrayed you once. Imagine how quickly they'll think it again, with my voice guiding the narrative. Unless, of course, you choose the wiser path. Henry's jaw tightened. And what path is that? Victoria leaned forward, her voice velvet over steel. $50 million. In exchange for silence. Pay me, and your wife's dignity remains intact. Refuse, and I'll ruin her. Ruin you, and your children will grow up in shame. Isabella stepped forward before Henry could reply. Her voice was calm, clear-cutting. You think you can still control us with fear? Victoria's eyes narrowed. My dear, fear is the oldest currency, and I've spent a lifetime mastering it. No, Isabella said firmly, her chin lifted. You've spent a lifetime mistaking cruelty for strength, and that ends tonight. Henry turned to her startled. Isabella had always been graceful, kind, and gentle, but now, standing before Victoria, she radiated steel. You ruined my name, Isabella continued, her voice rising. You poisoned my marriage, mocked my children, tried to erase me. And yet here I stand, unbroken, stronger, not because of your lies, but despite them. Her eyes locked on Victoria's, unwavering. You don't frighten me anymore. The silence that followed was electric. Even Ethan shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his mother with unease. Henry stepped to Isabella's side, his voice steady. She's right. You've already taken everything from us. Reputation, wealth, legacy. I don't care. None of it matters if I lose her again. If I lose my children. His gaze burned into Victoria. You hold nothing over us now. For the first time, Victoria faltered. The mask slipped. You're fools, she hissed, her composure unraveling. You think love will protect you. The world doesn't care about love. It cares about power. And when you've lost it, you're nothing. Henry's smile was bitter, but his voice was calm. Then I'd rather be nothing with her than everything with you. Isabella's hand slipped into his, their fingers intertwining. The gesture was simple, but it was a victory in that moment. Ethan stepped back, his expression pale. Mother. Silence. Victoria snapped, but her voice cracked, shrill, desperate. Henry drew a breath. We could destroy you with these recordings, expose you for the manipulative fraud you are. But we don't need to, because you've already destroyed yourself. When the world sees you for what you are, alone, bitter, consumed by greed, that will be punishment enough. Victoria staggered back a step, as though struck. For years she had orchestrated everything perfectly, always 3 moves ahead. But now, faced with the one weapon she could never wield, love, her empire of deceit crumbled. You'll regret this, she whispered. No, Isabella said softly. I regret nothing. Not loving Henry, not carrying his children, and not surviving your hatred. You don't own me anymore, Victoria. You never did. Tears filled her eyes, but they were tears of release, not defeat. Victoria turned abruptly, sweeping from the room, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Ethan lingered for a moment, torn between loyalty and shame. Then he followed, his shoulders slumped, his arrogance gone. The drawing room fell silent. Henry turned to Isabella, his eyes searching hers. You were incredible. Her breath shuddered. I only spoke the truth. He cupped her face gently, his voice breaking. I don't deserve you, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to. For the first time in months, Isabella leaned into his touch. The warmth was familiar, dangerous, intoxicating. She wanted to hate him, to keep her walls high. But love was stubborn. Their lips met in a kiss that was not forgiveness yet, but the beginning of something more substantial, a vow to rebuild. As they left the estate that night, snow began to fall over the gardens. The mansion loomed behind them, cold and empty, its halls echoing with the ghosts of greed. In the car, Isabella cradled Gabriel and Amara, who slept peacefully in their seats. Henry reached for her hand. She hesitated, then let him hold it. Outside, the city lights glimmered like stars. Inside, a fragile hope flickered to life. Victoria Hale had been defeated, stripped of her power. But the actual battle, the battle to heal love, to rebuild trust, was only beginning. Spring came quietly to New York. The city thawed from winter's grip trees budding with cautious blossoms, the air tinged with the scent of renewal. And in the Rodriguez apartment, life moved with the rhythm of tiny footsteps and laughter. Gabriel had begun to crawl, his hands slapping against the wooden floor, determined to chase the patch of sunlight near the window. Amara babbled beside him, her dark curls bouncing as she clutched a stuffed rabbit. Their joy filled the small space, banishing shadows. Isabella sat cross-legged on the rug, watching them with a tenderness that eased the ache in her heart. Every smile and sound proved that she had survived the storm. She had endured lies, betrayal, humiliation. Yet here in this moment, she was whole. The knock on the door startled her, though not entirely unexpectedly. Henry stood on the threshold, holding no briefcase, wearing no mask of polished power. His suit was simple, his eyes tired but sincere. In his hands he carried a bouquet of white lilies, the flowers she had once told him were her favorite years ago in a cafe in Chicago when their love was still new. "May I come in?" he asked softly. Isabella hesitated, then nodded. Henry knelt on the rug, lowering himself to the children's level. Gabriel studied him with curious eyes, before reaching out to tug at his tie. Henry laughed, the sound rough with emotion. "Hello, son," he whispered. Then turning to Amara, his hand gentle on her tiny fist, he said, "Hello, my little girl." Tears welled in his eyes as the twins accepted him without hesitation, without judgment. Children knew no betrayal, only love. Isabella watched, her heart tight. She had built walls around herself for months, convinced she could raise her children without him. Yet seeing Henry with them, raw and unguarded, stirred something she had buried. Henry looked up at her, his voice trembling. "I don't deserve them. I don't deserve you. But if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving I can be the man you and they need." Her lips parted, words caught in her throat. After the twins were asleep that evening, they sat together on the balcony. The city glittered below its chaos, softened by distance. Henry spoke first. "The empire is gone. The board voted me out last week. Smith Media will survive, but not under me." Isabella turned, startled. "And you're just letting it go?" He nodded. "I thought legacy was everything, that without the empire I was nothing. But I was wrong. Legacy isn't in towers or fortunes. It's here." He gestured toward the apartment, toward the room where their children slept. "It's in the family we build, the love we protect." For the first time in months, Isabella saw not the CEO, not the heir, but Henry, the man who had once held her hand under Paris street lamps, who had whispered promises of forever. Her voice softened. "You broke me, Henry. You left me to face the world alone." "I know." His voice cracked. "And if you never forgive me, I'll understand. But I'll never stop trying. Not for you. Not for them." Silence hung between them, heavy with memory. Then Isabella reached for his hand, tentatively, slowly. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the first step. Weeks passed and Henry returned often. First visit, the twins cooked dinner, and then fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen. The neighbors began to notice the tall man carrying groceries. The billionaire crouched on the floor, building towers of blocks with his children. Isabella watched him cautiously, awaiting the cracks, pride and arrogance. But instead, she saw patience, humility, devotion. One night as she tucked Gabriel and Amara into bed, she caught Henry standing in the doorway, his expression awash with wonder. "They're perfect," he whispered. "They're ours," she replied. Their eyes met across the room, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they both smiled. It was on a warm June evening, under the twinkling lights of a Brooklyn rooftop, that Henry made his vow. He had arranged nothing extravagant. No photographers, grand ballroom, or orchestra. Only candles, soft music from a single violinist he had found on the street corner, and the night sky above them. Isabella stepped onto the rooftop, her breath catching at the sight. Henry stood there, holding a simple velvet box. "Isabella Rodriguez." He began, his voice unsteady. "I destroyed us once, because I believed lies. I hurt you in ways no apology can mend. But I love you. I have always loved you, and I want to earn your forgiveness, trust, and heart daily. Not for legacy, not for power, for us, for our children, for love." He opened the box. Inside was not the most significant diamond money could buy, but a ring of elegant simplicity, a single stone, straightforward and unadorned, set in gold. Her hands trembled as she covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. "Marry me again," Henry whispered. "Not as a smith, not as a billionaire, but as a man who belongs to you." Isabella's heart pounded. Memories surged of betrayal, lost nights she swore she would never forgive him, but also of laughter, tenderness, and love that had betrayal lost stepped forward, her voice breaking. "Yes. A Than's yes." The wedding was small and intimate, held in the garden of their new home in Portland, Oregon, far from the noise of Manhattan. Roses bloomed, children played, and the air smelled lavender and hope. Maria stood proudly by her daughter's side, tears of joy in her eyes. Jessica toasted them with laughter and wit. The twins toddled down the aisle, Gabriel clutching the rings, Amara scattering petals. When Henry and Isabella exchanged vows, their voices shook with emotion. "I will never doubt you again," Henry promised. "I will love you with every breath and beat until my last day." "I forgive you," Isabella whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I choose you. I choose us." And when they sealed their vows with a kiss, the applause rose like music echoing through the garden. Years later, Henry would look back on that day, not as the end of a storm, but as the beginning of something greater. He and Isabella built a home filled not with marble or chandeliers, but with laughter, books, music, and love. Gabriel grew into a boy who asked endless questions, Amara into a girl whose laughter filled every corner. And through it all, Henry and Isabella remained side by side, scarred but stronger, wounded but healed, broken but rebuilt. Because love, they discovered, was not about perfection. It was about choosing each other again and again, even after the darkest nights. On a quiet evening, as the twins slept and the house glowed with candlelight, Isabella leaned against Henry's chest. "We lost everything," she whispered, "and found everything that mattered." He replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. She smiled, her hand resting over his heart. "Home. Home," Henry echoed. And in that single word lay their legacy. Not an empire of glass and steel, but a love that would outlive them both.